In the heart of northern Florida, the sheriff's badge carried weight far beyond its polished metal. Sheriff Raymond Falada had worn his for over 2 decades, and in the eyes of most townsfolk, he was the living embodiment of order. Broad-shouldered, with a face carved by sun and years of authority, he walked through the courthouse halls like a man who could bend the law yet never be questioned. Mothers trusted him to protect their children. Businessmen shook his hand as if sealing deals with Providence itself. But behind the polished smile, Sheriff Falada carried secrets as heavy as the swamp air. Nights at the local tavern, when whiskey drowned his discipline, whispers often followed. Whispers of debts at the poker table, of women who felt his gaze linger too long, of men who claimed the sheriff's sense of justice was for sale to the highest bidder. The town dismissed those stories the way people dismiss distant thunder. It rumbles, but life goes on. On the edge of town lived Emily Carter. At 19, she was the kind of girl who still kept her dreams folded neatly inside a worn journal. She worked weekends at a family diner, saved every tip in a mason jar, and prayed that someday she could leave this suffocating town behind. Emily wasn't like the other girls who rushed into dating. She was shy, cautious, almost old-fashioned. Her friends teased her for being the last virgin in town, but Emily would laugh it off, brushing strands of blonde hair from her face as if to hide the blush. She believed love was supposed to be something sacred, something waiting for the right person. Raymond Falada noticed her before she ever noticed him. He had seen her walking home one humid afternoon, diner uniform clinging to her small frame, eyes lowered, avoiding stares. To him, she was not a person but an opportunity, something untouched, something to conquer. That's how men like Falada thought. Power wasn't enough. It had to be proven, again and again, on whoever was most vulnerable. At the 4th of July barbecue that summer, Emily came with her mother, carrying a bowl of potato salad. The sheriff arrived late, his uniform shirt unbuttoned just enough to look casual, but the badge still glinting against his chest. He worked the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, kissing babies, letting everyone feel safe in his presence. When his eyes landed on Emily, his smile sharpened. He strolled over, his voice honey-dipped. "Emily Carter, isn't it? You're growing up fast. Your daddy would be proud." Emily nodded politely, clutching her paper plate. "Thank you, Sheriff. Mom says hello." Falada leaned closer, lowering his voice. "A girl like you shouldn't stay cooped up in this town. You ever think about a future bigger than waiting tables?" She smiled nervously. "Sometimes. I'd like to go to college. Maybe in Tallahassee." His eyes narrowed, studying her. To Falada, her innocence wasn't a quality, it was bait. That night, as fireworks cracked above the lake, Emily sat with her friends, laughing at the bursts of red and gold. Across the field, the sheriff watched her, a predator cloaked in respectability. The duality of Falada was the kind of thing people didn't like to admit about men in power. By day, he was the protector. By night, his vices roamed unchecked. He knew how to make people feel safe while calculating how to use them. He'd put men in handcuffs for minor bar fights, then gamble away his own paycheck in backroom games. He'd preach about law and order, then drink himself into oblivion behind motel doors. Emily had no idea she'd stepped into his sights. She was still that girl scribbling dreams in her journal, still believing in kindness. She didn't know that Falada was telling himself she was destined to be his next conquest. In small-town Florida, secrets don't stay buried long. But sometimes, the most dangerous secrets are the ones nobody wants to uncover. The sheriff's mask of power was still intact, gleaming for the public. No one could see the cracks yet. No one could imagine how, within weeks, both Emily's innocence and the sheriff's carefully built reputation would collide in a way that left the whole town gasping. The invitation came wrapped in the sheriff's voice, smooth, practiced, impossible to say no to. It was a late Friday evening when Emily's phone buzzed. She almost dropped it when she saw his name on the screen. "Emily, it's Sheriff Falada," he said, his tone casual, like a family friend calling to check in. "Listen, I've been thinking. You've got potential, kid. There's an opening at the station, clerical, nothing too heavy. I'd like to talk to you about it. Why don't you come by the lodge tonight? Just a quick chat." The lodge he mentioned wasn't really a lodge. It was an old roadside motel with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that had outlived its glory. Folks in town knew the sheriff kept a room there for convenience. But nobody asked questions. You didn't ask questions about Sheriff Falada. Emily hesitated. Something in her chest told her not to go. But the sheriff wasn't someone you ignored. And the thought of finally stepping out of her rut, of maybe earning her way out of the diner and closer to college, pushed her forward. She told her mother she was meeting a friend, slipped on a plain summer dress, and left before doubt could catch up. The motel parking lot was nearly empty, one dim bulb casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked asphalt. Emily parked her old sedan and sat for a long minute, clutching her steering wheel, wondering if this was a mistake. Then she heard the door open and saw Falada step out. He wasn't in uniform. He wore a loose button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, but the badge hung around his neck on a chain like a talisman, reminding her who he was. "Emily," he called warmly, waving her over. "Glad you made it." She forced a smile. "Thank you for thinking of me, Sheriff." Inside the room, the air smelled of stale cigarettes and aftershave. A single lamp on the nightstand bathed everything in a dull amber light. On the table sat 2 glasses and a bottle of bourbon, already uncorked. Falada gestured for her to sit. "Don't be nervous," he said, pouring a drink. "You're doing fine. I just want to help you. You remind me of what's still good in this town." Emily fidgeted with her hands. "I don't drink. Tonight you do." He pressed the glass into her palm. His voice was low, coaxing, like a man convincing a child to try something new. "One sip. Won't hurt you." Emily brought the glass to her lips, her heart pounding. She hated the bitter burn, but she swallowed anyway, hoping it would endear her to him, hoping it was just part of the ritual of being an adult in his world. Falada leaned back, watching her, eyes glinting. "You're a beautiful girl, Emily. You deserve more than waiting tables for pennies. Stick with me. I'll make sure you get that." Her voice trembled. "Sheriff, I don't know if this is right. I thought we were just going to talk about the job." He set his glass down, leaned closer, and let his hand brush her knee. "It's all connected. You want a future? Sometimes you gotta pay a price." Emily froze. She wanted to get up, to leave, but her body betrayed her, stiff with fear. The sheriff's presence filled the room like smoke, suffocating. "Please," she whispered. "I'm not. I've never." His smile widened, wolfish. "That's exactly why you're special. You don't want to throw that away on some boy who won't matter. You let me show you how it's done, and you'll thank me later." Her throat tightened. Every nerve screamed at her to run, but his hand was already firm on her leg, sliding upward. She pushed it away, but he caught her wrist, grip strong as iron. "Stop fighting," he growled softly. "You'll only make it harder." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "Please, Sheriff, don't do this." But his ears weren't listening. He wasn't the lawman now. He was a predator with no uniform, no restraint. The mask of power had slipped, revealing the hunger beneath. The next hour stretched like an eternity. The girl who had clung to her innocence, who had laughed at her friends' jokes about waiting, who had dreamed of a future untouched by scandal, felt her world collapse. When it was over, Falada rolled onto the bed with a sigh, pulling at the sheets like a man satisfied with a meal. Emily scrambled for her shoes, her breath ragged, her hands shaking. "You'll thank me," he muttered, eyes already closing. "One day, you'll see this was the best night of your life." Emily's stomach churned. She slipped out the door into the heavy night air, her tears hot on her cheeks. The neon sign sputtered above her, buzzing like a cruel laugh. She didn't look back. On the drive home, her headlights cut through the darkness, but nothing lit the emptiness inside her. The sheriff had taken something she'd guarded her whole life. She wanted to scream, to tell someone, but who would believe her? He was the sheriff. He was the law. Emily gripped the wheel tighter, whispering to herself, "Just forget it. Just make it through." But in the silence of her car, one truth echoed louder than any scream. This night would never leave her. And by morning, it wouldn't just be Emily whose world had shattered. Sheriff Falada's nightmare was only beginning. Sheriff Raymond Falada awoke before dawn with a start. At first, he thought it was the whiskey twisting in his gut. His head throbbed, his mouth dry as sandpaper. But then the pain hit him lower, sharper, a searing sting that made him wince and clutch at himself. He stumbled out of bed, muttering curses, the motel sheets tangled around his legs. The stale air carried the odor of sweat and bourbon, but there was something else, something foul creeping into his nostrils. a rancid, metallic stench that didn't belong. Falada shuffled into the bathroom, flicking on the weak fluorescent light. What he saw in the cracked mirror froze him. His skin was flushed, blotched red. And below the belt, the place he'd always worn like a weapon, like proof of his power, looked wrong. Angry. Swollen. The pain flared like fire licking through him. Jesus Christ, he whispered, leaning on the sink, his breath shallow. What the hell is happening? The sheriff who had broken bar fights with his fists, who had chased fugitives through swamps, now trembled like a child. His confidence, always his shield, began to fracture. By sunrise, the pain was unbearable. Falada barely managed to dress himself, yanking his jeans on and stumbling to his truck. He drove with one hand clenched on the steering wheel, the other pressed to his abdomen as if he could hold the agony in. The road blurred. Every bump jolted him like an electric shock. He didn't go to the hospital, not yet. Hospitals meant questions, and questions meant answers he couldn't control. Instead, he drove to the back entrance of a private clinic run by Dr. Charles Whitaker, a longtime friend who had covered for him before. Dr. Whitaker's eyes widened the moment he saw Falada stagger in, pale and sweating. "Raymond, you look like hell. What's going on?" Falada clenched his jaw. "I need you to check me. No questions. Just fix it." Whitaker guided him into an exam room. The sheriff fumbled with his belt, humiliation mixing with desperation. When the doctor peeled back the layers of fabric and saw the spreading infection, his face hardened. "This is serious," Whitaker said quietly. "You've got necrosis setting in. Tissue death. Where did this come from?" I was with someone," Falada muttered, eyes darting away. "Just handle it, damn it. Give me antibiotics, whatever it takes." Whitaker shook his head. "Antibiotics won't cut it. This is advanced. You need immediate treatment. If it spreads, we're talking systemic infection, sepsis. It can kill you." Falada slammed his fist against the exam table. "Then stop preaching and fix me." But doctors can only fix what truth allows. And Falada wasn't willing to speak it. Not fully. By midday, whispers began to crawl across town like ivy up old walls. The sheriff had been seen rushing into the clinic, face pale, gait unsteady. Nurses exchanged glances in the cafeteria. Orderlies whispered in corners. In a town that thrived on gossip, it didn't take long for speculation to ignite. At the diner, where Emily Carter worked her Saturday shift, two old women in sun hats sipped coffee and leaned close. "You hear about the sheriff?" one murmured. "Heard he's caught something nasty," the other replied, lips curling. "Not the first time men like him get what's coming." Emily's hand froze mid-swipe on the counter. Her stomach twisted. She didn't want to hear it. Didn't want the truth mirrored back at her in strangers' whispers. She excused herself to the restroom, locked the door, and slid to the floor, tears burning her eyes. She knew she hadn't felt right for weeks. Little warning signs her body had given her, strange itching, discomfort she tried to ignore. She'd been too scared, too ashamed to go to a doctor. What if someone found out? What if people laughed, or worse, whispered behind her back? Now the sheriff, the most powerful man in town, was rotting from the inside. And she couldn't shake the gnawing thought. Was it me? Back at the clinic, Dr. Whitaker broke the news Falada didn't want to hear. "You need to be hospitalized," he said firmly. "We're talking surgery, debridement, removing infected tissue. Without it, you won't last." Falada snarled, his pride flaring even as his body betrayed him. "I'm the sheriff. You think I'm going to walk into a hospital and let every damn nurse in this county see me like this? Hell no. Raymond, you don't have a choice," Whitaker insisted. "You're dying." But Falada's mind wasn't on death. It was on exposure, on headlines, on losing the one thing he clung to harder than life itself, his reputation. "Find another way," he barked. "Keep it quiet. I don't care what it takes." Whitaker sighed. "There's only so much I can do behind closed doors. The rest, it's out of my hands." That night, Falada lay alone in his bed, fever burning through him. Sweat soaked his pillow. The smell of decay filled the room, pungent and inescapable. He pressed his hand against his abdomen, shaking. How could this happen to me? He thought, rage and fear tangling in his chest. "I'm the sheriff. I own this town. But disease doesn't bend to badges. Infection doesn't bow to authority." For the first time in his life, Raymond Falada realized he couldn't command respect or obedience with a glare. His body had become his betrayer. And worse, somewhere out there, A girl with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands carried the secret of what he'd done. He could already hear the whispers, louder now, sharper, like knives aimed at his back. He closed his eyes, but there was no escape. The sheriff's nightmare had only begun, and dawn would bring not relief, but ruin. By Monday morning, the whole town was humming with speculation. In a place as small as Cedar Bluff, Florida, news didn't travel, it sprinted. It slipped through screen doors, spilled over grocery aisles, and clung to every conversation at the barber shop. Everyone had seen Sheriff Raymond Follett stumble into Dr. Whitaker's clinic like a man on the edge of collapse. He tried to keep it quiet, but small towns devour secrets. And when the man who wore the badge falters, the whispers turn venomous. They say he caught something dirty, muttered a mechanic leaning over a car hood. Dirty's one word for it, the gas station clerk replied. And from what I hear, it ain't just a cold sore. At the diner, where Emily Carter poured coffee into chipped white mugs, the whispers grew sharper. Two men at the counter chuckled low. Heard the sheriff couldn't keep his pants zipped. Probably paying the price now. Young girl, too, from what I hear. Their eyes slid toward Emily. Her hands trembled as she set the coffee pot back on the burner. Heat rose in her chest, not from the steam but from the shame that seemed to follow her like a shadow. She excused herself and fled to the kitchen, where her friend Marcy raised an eyebrow. Emily, what's going on? Folks out there are saying things, and they keep looking at you. Emily shook her head, eyes wide. Don't ask me. Please. Marcy reached for her arm, but Emily pulled away. If she said the truth out loud, it would shatter her world. That evening at home, her mother noticed the change. Emily barely touched her dinner, her fork scraping her plate more than it picked up food. Sweetheart, her mother said softly, is there something you need to tell me? Emily kept her gaze on the mashed potatoes. No. Her mother's voice hardened. Emily, I've been hearing things. About you and Sheriff Follett. Tell me it's not true. Tears stung Emily's eyes. Mom, I didn't want it. The words cracked something open in the kitchen. Her mother's face drained of color. What do you mean, you didn't want it? Emily's breath hitched. She wanted to say it all, that he lured her, that he tricked her, that she had begged him to stop. But the words tangled with shame. He made me. I thought it was about a job. But it wasn't. Her mother's chair scraped back as she stood, hands clutching the counter. Oh God. Emily. But instead of comfort, there was panic, almost anger. Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you say something right away? Emily's voice was small. Who would believe me? He's the sheriff. Her mother turned away, pressing her hands to her face. She knew her daughter was right. In this town, Follett wasn't just a man. He was the law. Meanwhile, the sheriff's illness was becoming impossible to hide. By midweek, he was no longer walking the streets with his chest puffed out. He was bedridden, feverish, his condition worsening by the hour. People whispered about infections, about rotting flesh. The more grotesque the rumor, the faster it spread. And as the whispers spread, they began to circle back to Emily. She had been seen leaving the motel the night of the fireworks. She had grown quiet, pale, withdrawn. Folks drew their own conclusions, and in small towns, conclusions become gospel long before truth arrives. At the diner again, a woman hissed as Emily passed by with a tray. Lord help us. That girl's got the devil in her. Sheriff Follett touched the wrong one. Emily's chest tightened. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, holding back tears until she could run into the walk-in cooler, collapsing against boxes of frozen fries. Later that night, her mother tried again. You need to go to the doctor, she urged. If there's something wrong with you, they need to know. And if he's, her voice cracked. Emily, you can't stay silent. Emily shook her head violently. No. If I go, everyone will know. They'll all call me names. They'll say it's my fault. Her mother grabbed her hands. It's not your fault. But the conviction in her tone wavered. Even she couldn't promise her daughter safety from judgment. By Friday, the gossip had reached a fever pitch. Men at the bar laughed that the sheriff had finally been brought low. Women clucked their tongues and whispered about curses, about sins catching up. Detective Harris, Follett's deputy, heard it too. He had always suspected his boss of bending the rules. But this? It was something darker. When he saw Emily walking home alone, shoulders hunched, he pulled over. Emily, he called gently, can I talk to you? She froze, clutching her purse strap. I don't want trouble. You're not in trouble. People are saying things. About you. About the sheriff. I need to know if it's true." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please don't make me say it." Harris sighed, his jaw tightening. He had seen enough victims in his years to know the look in her eyes. Fear. Shame. Silence. "You don't have to say it," he murmured. "But sooner or later, this town will demand answers." Emily turned away, whispering to herself, "They'll never believe me. They never do." And so the whispers grew teeth. The sheriff's sickness became the town's obsession, and Emily's silence became her condemnation. The walls of Cedar Bluff were closing in, suffocating her with judgment, suspicion, and fear. Neither she nor the sheriff could stop what was coming. The storm was only gathering strength, and when it broke, it would drag them both into the open. By the following week, Cedar Bluff was no longer just a town with whispers. It was a town on fire. Local reporters had caught wind of Sheriff Fallada's mystery illness, and the story spread like gasoline across state lines. First it was a blurb in the county paper, then a segment on the evening news. Respected Florida sheriff under investigation amid health crisis and alleged scandal. The words alleged scandal were all it took. Rumors hardened into headlines, and headlines hardened into belief. Outside the courthouse, trucks from regional news stations lined the street. Cameramen adjusted tripods. Journalists rehearsed lines. The people of Cedar Bluff, who once tipped their hats at Sheriff Fallada, now gathered in clusters, waiting to hear what new shame would be revealed. And in the middle of the storm stood Emily Carter. She hadn't chosen this stage. She hadn't asked for the spotlight. But she was in it now, whether she liked it or not. The sheriff, meanwhile, was unraveling. His condition worsened daily, his body betraying him, his pride gutted. His once booming voice cracked with fever. And when the first reporter shoved a microphone toward him outside the clinic, asking if it was true he had slept with a teenage girl, his response was sharp, venomous. "That girl tricked me." He spat, sweat dripping down his brow. "She knew what she had. She lured me in. This is her doing, not mine." The clip aired that night on every local channel. By morning, Emily's name was whispered with fury. Not just victim, suspect. At the diner, customers didn't look at her the same. Some sneered. Some smirked knowingly. Others stared as if she carried a loaded gun in her pocket. One man muttered loud enough for her to hear. "Should lock her up. Poison in a pretty face." Emily rushed to the back, hands trembling, breath shallow. Marcy found her crouched against the wall. You've got to get ahead of this," she whispered urgently. "He's painting you as the villain. If you stay quiet, people will believe him." Emily shook her head violently. "No. If I speak, they'll tear me apart. They already think it's my fault." Marcy's voice softened. "They'll think that either way. But the truth, that's all you've got left." Days later, Detective Harris appeared on her porch, his face grim beneath the brim of his hat. "Emily, it's official now. You've been named in the investigation. They'll want you to testify." Her mother gasped, clutching the doorframe. "Testify? She's the victim." Harris lowered his eyes. "Victim or not, the sheriff's statement has weight. The town split down the middle. Some want him gone. Others, they still see him as their hero." He glanced at Emily. "You need to prepare yourself. Court of law's one thing. Court of public opinion? That's a different beast." Emily swallowed hard, tears pooling but not falling. "How do you fight a man everyone worshipped?" Harris didn't answer. He didn't need to. The first confrontation came not in a courtroom, but in a press-filled hallway. Reporters swarmed Emily as she tried to leave the courthouse after signing a statement. Microphones pressed close, flashes blinding. "Emily, did you knowingly infect Sheriff Fallada? Were you aware of your medical condition before sleeping with him? Are you seeking revenge?" Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I didn't know. I didn't want any of this." But her words were drowned by the roar of voices, the clicking of cameras. And on the evening broadcast, her small, broken denial was cut short, overshadowed by the sheriff's booming claim. "She knew. She ruined me." At night, Emily lay awake, listening to the town tear her apart from the safety of her own walls. Online forums lit up with venom. Some called her a liar, others called her a witch. Few believed she was simply a girl cornered by power. Her mother tried to console her, sitting at the edge of her bed. "Sweetheart, you've got to be strong. The truth has a way of surviving." But Emily only shook her head. "Not here. Not against him." Meanwhile, Falada clung to his fading power like a drowning man clutching driftwood. He summoned his lawyer and staged a press conference, forcing his failing body to stand at a podium. "I have served this county with honor for 23 years, he declared, voice shaking but defiant. "And I will not be destroyed by the lies of a young woman who couldn't face her own mistakes." Cameras flashed. The crowd roared approval. Some cheered. Others booed. Back home, Emily watched from the couch, her heart in her throat. The man who had taken everything from her was now parading as the betrayed, and people were buying it. Her fists clenched. For the first time since that night, anger cut through her fear. "He did this to me," she whispered fiercely. "He made me, and he'll never admit it." Her mother touched her shoulder. "Then you'll have to admit it for him." And so the stage was set. A courtroom battle loomed, but the real trial had already begun. In living rooms, diners, churches, and bars, everyone had chosen a side. Emily Carter versus Sheriff Raymond Falada. Innocence versus reputation. Truth versus power. The town of Cedar Bluff wasn't just watching. It was judging, and their verdict would come long before the juries. The courthouse in Cedar Bluff had never seen a crowd like this. By the morning of the trial, the narrow hallway was clogged with reporters, locals, and curious onlookers who treated the day's proceedings like the Super Bowl. Everyone wanted a seat. Everyone wanted to see Emily Carter face off against Sheriff Raymond Falada. Inside the courtroom, sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the polished wood and the American flag behind the judge's bench. The smell of old paper and sweat hung thick in the air. The bailiff barked for order, his voice nearly swallowed by the buzz of whispers. Emily sat at the defense table beside her attorney, a wiry man named David Monroe whose eyes were sharper than his frame suggested. She clutched a tissue in her hands, twisting it to pieces. Across the aisle, Sheriff Falada sat propped up by his lawyer. His once powerful frame looked diminished, hollowed out by infection and fever. But his eyes still burned, defiance smoldering in their depths. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair named Judge Caroline Price, entered. "This court is now in session. Case of the state of Florida versus Emily Carter." The prosecutor, a broad-shouldered man named Gerald Timmons, rose first. He wasted no time. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is about responsibility. Sheriff Raymond Falada has dedicated his life to protecting this community. But one night with the defendant, Emily Carter, left him fighting for his life. Why? Because she knowingly concealed a dangerous condition and failed to warn him. She made a choice that nearly killed him. Today, you will see evidence that her silence was not innocence. It was intent." He sat, and all eyes turned to Emily. David Monroe stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about intent. It's about power. Raymond Falada was the most powerful man in this county. He used that power to lure, manipulate, and violate a young woman who trusted him. Emily Carter is not a predator. She is a victim, victimized once by the sheriff, and now again by the system that seeks to punish her silence. When you hear her testimony, when you see the truth, you'll realize who really holds responsibility for this tragedy." The jury shifted uneasily. The lines were drawn. The prosecution began with Dr. Whitaker. He described Falada's condition in cold, clinical terms. Necrosis, tissue death, systemic infection. Severe, potentially fatal. "Doctor," Timmons asked, "is it possible this condition was caused by exposure to another infected individual?" Whitaker hesitated, glancing toward Emily. "Yes, that is possible." The jurors scribbled notes. The sheriff's lawyer smirked. Next came the sheriff himself. He shuffled to the stand, every step strained, but his voice carried the old weight of authority. "I never wanted this. I gave this county 23 years. Then I met her. She came to me, looking for opportunity. She knew what she had. She knew, and she said nothing. That's not a mistake. That's a crime." David Monroe rose for cross-examination. His voice was sharp as a blade. "Sheriff, are you saying under oath that Emily Carter pursued you?" "Yes," Falada said firmly. Monroe took a step closer. "So you're telling this court that a 19-year-old girl overpowered the will of a 55-year-old sheriff? That she seduced you, a man with decades of experience, authority, and control?" Falada's jaw clenched. "She knew what she was doing. And when she asked you to stop?" Monroe pressed. Did you listen? A ripple spread through the courtroom. The sheriff's face reddened. She never said, "Yes or no, Sheriff." Did she ask you to stop? Fallada's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Jurors shifted in their seats, whispers buzzing like bees. Then it was Emily's turn. She walked to the stand, as if carrying the weight of the whole world on her shoulders. Her hands shook as she placed them on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. "Emily," Monroe said gently, "can you tell the court what happened the night you went to see Sheriff Fallada?" Her voice cracked at first. "He called me. He said there was a job. He said he could help me. And what happened when you got there?" Her eyes filled with tears. He poured me a drink. I said no, but he made me. He touched me. I begged him to stop. I told him I wasn't ready. But he didn't care." The courtroom went still. You could hear the shuffle of a single shoe. Monroe leaned closer. "Did you know about your condition, Emily?" She shook her head violently. "No. I was scared. I'd felt something wrong before, but I didn't know what it was. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt anyone." The prosecutor rose, his tone sharp. "Miss Carter, are you asking this jury to believe that you, a 19-year-old woman, had no idea you were sick? That you never once thought to seek treatment?" Emily's lip quivered. "I was scared. People judge you here. I didn't want to be called names. I thought it would go away. Yet you chose to engage with the sheriff anyway." Her voice broke. "I didn't choose. He chose for me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. When she stepped down, Emily collapsed into her chair, tears soaking the shredded tissue in her hands. The courtroom was split. Half the faces softened with sympathy. The other half hardened with suspicion. Judge Price called for recess, her gavel cracking through the noise. "This court will reconvene tomorrow morning." As the crowd spilled out, voices clashed in the hallway. "She's lying. She's telling the truth. She ruined him. He ruined her." Emily sat frozen, staring at the floor. Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders, whispering, "You did what you had to. The truth's out now." But in her heart, Emily wasn't sure the truth was enough. In a courtroom, truth didn't always win. Power did. And Sheriff Fallada still held more power than anyone wanted to admit. The trial was far from over. And tomorrow, the jury would be forced to decide, was Emily Carter a victim or a criminal? The second day of trial dawned gray and heavy, the kind of morning that pressed down on the town like a warning. Crowds once again filled the courthouse steps, their voices low and tense. Some carried signs demanding justice for the sheriff. Others whispered prayers for Emily. No one came without an opinion. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. Emily sat at the defense table, her eyes swollen from a night of restless tears. Her attorney whispered encouragement, but his words slid off her like rain on glass. Across the aisle, Sheriff Fallada leaned back in his chair, gaunt and pale, but his smirk returned, faint but cruel. The jury filed in, their faces solemn. Judge Price reminded them of their duty, her voice stern. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard the evidence. You will now decide the fate of the defendant, Emily Carter." Hours passed while the jury deliberated. Emily sat in a holding room with her mother, staring at the clock. Every tick was a hammer on her chest. "Mom," she whispered, "what if they believe him? What if they think I wanted this?" Her mother gripped her hand tight. "You told the truth. That's all you could do." But even her mother's voice shook. When the bailiff finally called them back, Emily's knees nearly buckled. She forced herself to stand, forced herself to walk into the courtroom where her life waited in 12 strangers' hands. The foreman rose, a folded slip of paper trembling in his grasp. Judge Price's voice was steady. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." She took the paper, unfolded it, and read aloud. The silence was suffocating. "On the charge of knowingly causing grievous bodily harm by failing to disclose a medical condition, we find the defendant, Emily Carter, guilty." The words crashed over Emily like a tidal wave. Her chest heaved, her vision blurred. Her mother cried out, clutching her arm. The courtroom erupted. Half the crowd gasped in triumph. Others shouted in outrage. Judge Price slammed her gavel again and again. "Order! Order in the court!" Emily's attorney leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, this is a miscarriage of justice. She was the victim." But Judge Price's face was stone. "The jury has spoken." Emily's legs gave way as deputies moved to cuff her. She sobbed, the sound raw and childlike. "I didn't want this," she whispered, over and over. I didn't want any of this. Across the room, Sheriff Falada watched, his lips curling into the faintest smile. His body was decaying, his career destroyed, but in that moment, he had won. The girl who had begged him to stop now wore chains while he still sat as a man of authority. Judge Price's voice cut through the chaos. The sentence will be 20 years in state prison. The deputies pulled Emily toward the door, her mother screaming behind her. She's just a child. He's the monster, not her. But the gavel fell again, sealing Emily's fate. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, townsfolk cheered or cursed. The court of public opinion had merged with the court of law, and both had turned against Emily Carter. As the van door slammed shut and she was driven away, Emily pressed her forehead to the cold metal wall, her tears soaking her sleeves. She had spoken the truth. She had begged to be believed. And still, she was the one condemned. In Cedar Bluff, the jury had decided not who was guilty, but who was easier to blame. Sheriff Raymond Falada never made it to see the end of the season. Within months of Emily Carter's sentencing, his body gave out. The infection that had started as a private humiliation consumed him piece by piece. No amount of medicine could stop the rot. No surgeon could save the tissue that blackened and died. He spent his final days in a hospital bed, his once commanding frame wasted to bone and shadow. The man who had strutted through Cedar Bluff with a badge and a smirk now lay surrounded by beeping machines, the stench of decay never leaving his room. Nurses spoke of him in hushed tones, some with pity, most with disdain. Falada raged at them when he could, his voice a rasp. Don't look at me like that. I'm still the sheriff. But no one believed him anymore. Titles don't mean much when you're shackled to an four-pole. When death finally came, it was quiet, almost merciful. There was no grand farewell, no gathering of townsfolk. His funeral was small, attended only by a handful of colleagues who came out of obligation more than respect. The flag on his coffin could not hide the whispers that followed him into the ground. Predator, disgrace, liar. For Cedar Bluff, his death was less a tragedy than an exhale, a release of a poison that had festered in the heart of their town. In a prison cell miles away, Emily Carter heard the news through the evening broadcast. She was sitting on her cot, staring at the cracks in the concrete wall, when the anchor's voice drifted through the television in the common room. Sheriff Raymond Falada, longtime lawman of Cedar Bluff, has died after a prolonged illness. He was 56. Emily froze, her plastic fork slipping from her hand. Inmates nearby clapped and hollered at the story, laughing cruelly, but Emily didn't move. Her chest tightened, her throat dry. She wasn't happy. She wasn't relieved. She just felt heavier, as if the weight of his shadow had followed her behind the prison walls. That night, she lay awake on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. A swirl of emotions consumed her: anger, sorrow, guilt. She whispered to the darkness, "You ruined me. And still, I'm the one locked away." Her cellmate rolled over, groaning. "Go to sleep, kid. World's not fair. Never has been." Emily turned her face to the wall, tears soaking into her pillow. The words were simple, but they cut deep. The world wasn't fair. And in her bones, she knew it never would be. Outside, Cedar Bluff tried to move on, but the scars remained. Parents whispered warnings to their daughters. Women exchanged knowing glances when powerful men spoke too kindly. And at the diner, Marcy still worked shifts, staring sometimes at the door as if expecting Emily to walk in again, carrying that shy smile she once had. But Emily Carter would not walk through that door for a long, long time. She was 20 years old with 20 years to serve. Her youth had been stolen twice, once by the sheriff, and again by the jury that chose to believe him. Yet even as she sat in her cell, writing in a worn notebook, she clung to one fragile thread, that her story, her truth, might one day be heard. Not just as gossip or scandal, but as the warning it was meant to be. Sheriff Raymond Falada had fallen, but Emily remained. And in her survival, bruised and broken though it was, lay the faintest spark of defiance. Because sometimes, the only justice left is the simple act of outliving your oppressor. When Sheriff Raymond Falada was lowered into the ground, Cedar Bluff should have felt closure. But the town didn't breathe easier, it held its breath. His death didn't erase the scandal, it only sealed it in history. The whispers lived on, staining his name like grease on a white shirt. Parents still warned their daughters, Don't trust a man just because he wears a badge. Wives still asked their husbands pointed questions whenever the sheriff's name came up in barroom talk. The diner where Emily once worked felt emptier. Her absence was a wound that didn't heal. Marcy, her closest friend, often caught herself glancing at the door, expecting Emily to push it open with her shy smile, carrying her notebook of dreams. But the booth where she'd scribbled in silence remained vacant. Customers sometimes lowered their voices when they passed it, as though the ghost of her laughter still lingered. Emily's story divided the town in two. For some, she was a liar, a reckless girl who brought shame on herself and destruction to their sheriff. For others, she was a victim of power and silence, punished not for a crime, but for daring to speak against the most powerful man in Cedar Bluff. Churches preached about sin and consequence. Bars traded jokes at her expense. Families argued at dinner tables, voices rising, plates clattering. And yet, beneath all the noise, there was something else, something harder to admit: doubt. Doubt that the jury had gotten it right. Doubt that justice had really been served. Inside her prison cell, Emily carried those doubts like weights on her shoulders. Weeks turned into months, and months blurred into years. She kept to herself mostly, scribbling thoughts in her notebook late at night while the other women slept. Some nights, she wrote letters she never mailed. "Dear Mom, I wish I could undo that night. I wish I had said no louder, fought harder. But I didn't know how. And now I'm here, and he's gone, and I'm left holding all the pieces." Other nights, her writing took on fire. "They took everything from me. My body, my freedom, my voice. But they can't take the truth. He's dead, and I'm still alive. Maybe that's the only justice I'll ever have." When she ran out of words, she'd lie awake, remembering the 4th of July fireworks, how the sky had once felt limitless. Back then, she'd dreamed of college, of leaving Cedar Bluff behind. Now she measured freedom by the width of her cell door and the hours of sunlight on the prison yard. The town, meanwhile, moved on in outward appearance. Elections brought a new sheriff, one who swore to restore trust and dignity to the office. Yet in hushed tones, people admitted it wasn't so simple. Falada's shadow stretched long. The badge, once a symbol of safety, now carried a stain that couldn't be polished away. A local reporter wrote a piece that sparked conversation beyond Cedar Bluff: "The Girl and the Sheriff, a story of silence, power, and blame." The article questioned not only Falada's actions, but the jury's verdict. It asked why the town had been so quick to punish a 19-year-old girl while excusing a man whose sins were known long before the scandal broke. The article didn't free Emily, but it planted seeds. Seeds of doubt, seeds of conversation, and in some ways, seeds of hope. Years later, on the anniversary of her sentencing, Emily sat in the prison chapel during evening service. The pastor spoke about forgiveness, about how even the worst sins could be washed clean. Emily closed her eyes, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Forgiveness felt far away. But when she opened her eyes and saw the sun spilling through the stained glass windows, painting her skin in fractured colors, she allowed herself a thought she hadn't dared before. Survival was its own kind of defiance. She had survived him. She had survived the verdict. She would survive the years still ahead. Cedar Bluff might remember her as a cautionary tale, a scandal, a name whispered with judgment. But Emily knew who she was. And when the world finally tired of the sheriff's story, maybe, just maybe, it would hear hers. Because in the end, the truth was simple, cruel, and enduring. Sheriff Raymond Falada had fallen, but Emily Carter remained. And though she was caged, her heart still beat, her pen still moved, her voice still existed. Sometimes survival is louder than any verdict. And in the silence of her cell, Emily Carter promised herself, one day, the world would know it. The courtroom was heavy with silence. Yet beneath that silence pulsed the raw energy of lives destroyed and truths finally unearthed. Every seat was filled, every breath seemed caught, as if the entire town had gathered to bear witness to the collapse of a family, a marriage, and a lie that had stretched across decades. Clarissa sat rigid in the witness stand, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her voice trembled as she answered the prosecutor's questions, but her eyes stayed fixed on Daniel, her husband, her betrayer, the man she once believed was her soulmate. He couldn't meet her gaze. For the first time, The mask he had worn for years seemed broken beyond repair. Mrs. Monroe, the prosecutor asked softly, when you first discovered Daniel's secret, what did you feel? The room leaned in. Clarissa exhaled shakily, a tear rolling down her cheek. I felt like my entire life had been stolen from me. 20 years of memories, of intimacy, of trust, suddenly none of it was real. I thought I was building a marriage, a family. But I was living in a play where the script was written by someone who lied to me every single day. Her words were daggers, and Daniel flinched with each one. The defense attorney rose, pacing slowly. Mrs. Monroe, would you say your anger was so overwhelming that it clouded your judgment? That perhaps, in that moment, you were capable of violence you never imagined before? The question hung in the air like smoke. Clarissa's chin lifted, defiance flashing through her tears. I was angry, yes. But do not twist my pain into an excuse for murder. I didn't kill him. I may have wished the truth had been different, but I didn't take his life. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Daniel finally looked up, his face pale, his lips quivering as though words were clawing to be freed. He shifted in his seat, his lawyer gripping his arm as if to hold him back. But the weight of silence was too much. Stop, Daniel blurted, his voice cracking. The courtroom froze. Stop blaming her for something she didn't do. If you want the truth, then here it is. I destroyed everything. I lied. I deceived. And because of me, Letitia is dead. The judge's gavel banged, calling for order, but the words had already detonated like a bomb. Clarissa stared at him, stunned. Daniel, what are you saying? His eyes finally met hers, filled with a mix of shame and something that almost resembled love. I wasn't the one holding the weapon, but I set it all in motion. My lies, my fear of losing you, my weakness, they led her into that alley. And she never came back. The jury shifted uneasily, torn between pity and revulsion. The prosecutor stepped forward. Mr. Monroe, are you confessing to orchestrating your wife's death? Daniel swallowed hard. I'm confessing that I destroyed the woman I claimed to love. I may not have pulled the trigger, but her blood is on my hands. Gasps filled the air, the sound echoing off the wooden walls like a haunting hymn. Clarissa's face crumpled, not with rage, but with the profound sorrow of a woman who had lost more than she could ever name. Her voice broke as she whispered, You could have told me the truth. I might have still loved you. I might have stayed, but you never gave me that chance. For a long, unbearable moment, no one moved. The truth had finally been spoken, but it didn't bring peace. It brought only a deeper kind of grief, the kind that lingered long after the gavel fell, after the crowds dispersed, after the headlines faded. Because what had been destroyed was not just a marriage or a family. It was trust itself, the fragile thread that holds human hearts together. And once broken, it could never truly be repaired.